This is a video about good ads and bad ads. What are we going to look for when we are dealing with our design critique, right? So, first thing I do is I bring the design critique up and I outline that section, right? This is my laundry list of what I need to talk about, okay? So then I just sort of leave that off to the side, and this way I can, refer to the requirements when I'm writing my critique, right? So, a few things to think about first is that there's a lot of bad design out there, way more than good design, and you run into bad design all the time. So you're probably a little immune to it, so it may be where sometimes you don't even look at the design at all, but if it was all good design, you would notice it, right? So anyway, a good example of a bad ad, right? Very unfocused, just we don't, we know what's going on. It tells us what's happening, but the layout is pretty grim, right? It's all, all the negative space is filled up. Everything is about the same weight. There's no contrast. There's no real headline. There's no hook. It's just a big splot of content, right? So, not necessarily the best example of good design. Magazine covers are tough, right? Because they typically are wall to wall, and they're really designed to get your attention while you're walking past the magazine rack at the drugstore or something like that. And so they're really, it's a lot of punch, a lot like, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me. But really, in terms of the design, same thing we had in the other ad. Everything's very, very equally weighted. It doesn't really give us a chance to have something that's just really specific. Certainly the card jumps out, and I think that's an important thing. But when I really look at everything, it's pretty flat and pretty equally powerful, which makes it all equally not powerful. Some ads are just wall-to-wall stuff, here, texture everywhere, the text doesn't stand out, even that they're trying to do a nice job. I mean, the image alone is enough to overwhelm you. I mean, look at what's happening in this picture. I mean, it's got every possible thing you could imagine. The table's filled with place settings and flowers and candles, and the picture's got a horrible frame around it, and the curtains are all really overdone. I mean, it's a lot. And then everything else has got textures too, from here and here, right? And so there's just so much happening. So this would be a very difficult ad to critique, even though they're trying. It's sad. They really tried. But is it working? Not really. Okay. And here's a good example of an ad that just is very amateurish. Again, we have a little teeny bit of a headline, but, is the treehouse the most important thing? It's really one of those things where, we're not sure what it is we're looking at, but everything is fairly equal. The images are really busy, so there's no real specific focus. The text is all rather small. There's multiple typefaces going on here, so it's really, it's a bit of a mess. So try and be selective, if I will, when you get to your ads. So simple is usually better, So here's one, and what you'll find is that ads, if you happen to Google good, magazine ads, you'll find a lot of stuff from Europe, and so you'll find their design sensibilities are significantly different than ours, and they'll get away with stuff that we could never get away with. So anyway, so this is a little bit like repetition, right? So here we are looking at our criteria here, right? And so we're looking for, is there repetition? Yeah, right. The two rectangles are exactly identical. And then you look at, well, there's a little similarity because the text is a little bit different, but it's mostly repetition. We have contrast in color, right? We have a texture versus a flat color, and a hot red versus a very subdued, brick color. So there's a little bit of contrast going on there. And anything else that's happening? No, those are probably the two dominant elements there. I'm not going to comment on everything. I'm going to just comment on the dominant element or elements that are happening here in terms of these different criteria, just to give you an idea of what to look for, okay? Here, okay, we've got repetition, right? Very, very, all the bottles all identically the same. We have a little, not so much contrast, not really any anomaly. The typography is clean and straightforward. Let's see what else we have here. No gradation, no radiation, no concentration. Maybe a little concentration because everything is, pushed over to one side. The composition is dynamic because it's not centered, right? It's off center. We have weight over here and not so much weight over there. What else do we have in there? Anything else? Like I said, typography is clean. No real structure. There might be columns here. You'd have to actually measure them out. There might be 2 more columns over here, so there might be 6 columns, maybe, possibly. Okay. This is kind of a neat ad. We have contrast in a very busy versus a very quiet image. We have anomaly because the color red is jumping out at us and everything else is black and white. What else do we have? We have a dynamic layout, right? Because, everything is concentrated, which you have concentration, right? All the text is very tight and pushed over to the left-hand side. There could be structure. It looks like this is maybe 1/4 and this is 3/4. So that would basically be 4 rows. So we could think about that. Typography is effective and good, right? The sans serif bold type really gives a punch home. It's all good there. What else? That's about it for that one. This is kind of a neat ad. We have similarity because we have these 3 columns and these 3 columns. So they're clearly trying to make a relationship between these 2 things. So a strong sense of similarity there. There does appear to be a structure. If this is 1 square right here, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. Okay, so there's 7 rows there. Are these guys in the rows? No, probably not, but at least it looks like they attempted to have some sense of structure to that. Typography is super clean, right? We got the names and we got all this little fine type here. Typography could be a little tough to read, right? It's a little bit small, a little bit light and gray. Maybe could be pumped up a little bit, maybe not, There's also contrast, right? Because these are organic shapes and these are very geometric shapes. So we have a contrast in shape. What else do we have here? No anomalies, no gradations. Color scheme is sophisticated, right? Because we've got the black and the very light gray. Those are very sophisticated colors. They give the impression of, class, and it gives the impression of, like I said, sophistication. So, color scheme kind of works for that. The composition, while it seems to be centered, has a very dynamic feel because of the strong base right in here and then the more organic shape up here. So it definitely has a sense of dynamic composition. Anything else? So that's, that takes care of that one a little bit. These are kind of neat ads because we have a little bit of, we have repetition because of the shapes exactly the same. We have similarity because the colors are a little bit different. We have radiation because we appear to have a center point here, and then we have a very strong sense of these LED bulbs shooting out from that particular space. The design is half static and half dynamic. It's static because it has a centered layout, but it's dynamic because these 2 elements and the little bit of anomaly on the title tends to make the design look a little bit off-center. Its neighboring ad has a more of a dynamic feel. It definitely has a strong sense of repetition in shape and in size, but similarity in color and texture. Same thing happens with the layout. This is more dynamic because it's definitely not centered. We have a little bit of anomaly again because of the shift in direction. So we even everything tends to be sort of horizontal, and then that's very vertical. Okay, typography is small but seems to be effective. Color scheme is very sophisticated: white, gray, black, Those are all very, very sophisticated colors, because they aren't colors, really, they're values. So there's a sense of sophistication in that. So, that takes care of that design. Oops, sorry. Here, a little bit on the crowded side. It's definitely a dynamic layout. Nothing is centered. The bottom is centered, but everything else is not centered. Well, I guess it is sort of centered, right? Because we have this black element in the middle and everything else is white on each side. We've got 3 balanced on each side, but they're offset, and so we don't get that sense of complete, regularity of repetition. So we have here similarity, a very strong similarity in the different product elements. They are obviously all clearly related, but not the same. The color scheme, again, is on that more sophisticated side because of the very subtle value changes that are going on in the gradations in the background. Gradation going on, right? A little bit of gradation in that background. Little gradation going on in that title. So typography is nice, clean, solid. A little bit of anomaly with the grain. Even though we are picking that up a little bit here, this tends to stand out as a little bit different. So we've got that going on. What else is happening here? That's about right. Sense of space here, because these elements are overlapped and some are advancing forward and some are receding back. So a little bit of space there. Anything else going on here? Let's talk target market. Most likely women. These product cares, even though they're for men and women. Men, they kind of don't really go for that, at least not that much. But they're trying, But again, the ad, it's a little generic, so perhaps it is working for both, all right? So something to think about there. Here, this is a more playful ad. We have a young individual who's also illustrated. All these different circles are in repetition because they're circles, but they're in similarity because they're not the same size nor the same weight. The type is very casual, right? Very arty, right? It's all handwritten. Even the typeface for the URL is playful. So it has a very young, very arty kind of approach, right? A little anomaly with this bent yellow pencil tends to stand out a little bit. What else do we have here? Anything else? Typography, like I said, is good and clean. Composition's dynamic, right? There's definitely no real sense of being centered. There's a very strong weight towards the left, balanced by the weight on the right, but the image definitely holds the power and the drama. Okay. This cute ad, heavily based on photography, but it's a very strong sense of similarity with all these kids all hanging out on that big girder. A very strong sense of space because of the advancement of the image and the receding of the city below. A very strong anomaly with the red logo. What else do we have here going on? That pretty much takes care of that. The black and white emphasizes the datedness of the imagery and helps to emphasize the red of the logo. No typography. Composition's dynamic. No structure. So it's some of the things that stand out on that one. This is a cute ad, right? A very strong sense of radiation. We have that very strong center point, and the elements tend to be moving out from that element. There's repetition in the little light switches. There's an anomaly in the yellow color. Typography is clean, clear, and probably fine at size, right? It's a little small here on the screen, but it looks like it's okay in that point. Design is static. It's centered, equal on both sides. Okay, some things there. This ad, right? A very strong sense of radiation. We have that, just the wheel itself with a very strong outward energy coming from the center point. Very strong sense of repetition going around the outside edge there. Repetition with the little rabbits cruising down here. It's off center, so the dynamic layout helps to keep it from being a little bit boring. Color scheme, the silver and black, can't go wrong with that for sophistication. Type's a little small, right? You know, even at this size, we're struggling a little bit with possibly reading it. The contrast is struggling a little bit. The word Audi would be an anomaly, but it's so small that it's sort of struggling even in that regard. So there's some things that could be improved with this ad. This is a cute ad from India, right? So what we have is repetition because we have all these different heads, but they're similar because the eyes are a little bit different in each one. And we also have the woman, and she creates a slight bit of anomaly because she's different in every single row, even though she repeats. You know, it's a difference in each line, and so that tends to stand out as an anomaly. What's interesting about the ad is that it's clear that even though the employment has risen in India, the number of women in the employment sector has not. So that's an interesting, you know, simple graphic visual that helps to, you know, identify that. Typography is clean, dynamic layout because it's not centered. So those are the things that stand out there. Here we have a strong sense of repetition. We have a sense of space because these elements are receding into the distance. We have a little contrast going on there from the big to the small. What else is going on there? Yeah, that pretty much takes care of that dynamic layout. Typography is minimal to none, just a little headline, a little anomaly with the red logo. Dynamic layout, like I said, that's it for that one. Contrast, right? Big contrast here. Little versus big, colorful versus colorful versus monochromatic. Color scheme is very sophisticated with the very subtle green and the gray. There's a little gradation going on with the background. This is when they were doing the logo change from the color to the monochromatic. So we can see, you know, that they were trying to make a change and they were trying to relate the brand, the old brand to the new brand. So, you know, typography, typical Apple, very straightforward, clean, no fussiness. So those are the things that stand out on that one. This ad's kind of neat. It's a little more like what you might find in a common situation. We have repetition because we have the three graphics that are exactly the same size and exactly the same shape. We have similarity because they're all in the same subject matter, but they have slightly different focus. We have the establishing shot, then we have the moving up the mountain shot, and then we have the hitting the pow. So we have a very strong sense of progression in this particular ad. We have an anomaly with the red, which brings us to the anomaly of the adventure, which is handwritten versus the actual text. So that jumps out on its own. And then the logo itself is a little bit of an anomaly because it doesn't have anything graphically to do with any of the rest of the content. So there's a sense of structure because we have three very strong rows going on, so a sense of structure going on there. The layout is sort of static because, you know, there's no real sense of strong dynamic in one direction or another. Even the skier is centered right in the middle, so you could say the design is probably more static than dynamic. This is a cool ad. Again, something more common that you might find. We have a sense of repetition in the text because it's all heavy, it's all black, and even though they're different line lengths, they all have this very same or very similar amount of weight. We have an anomaly with the product, and it's, you know, everything is solid and square and rectilinear, and then we got this crumpled wrapper, and it's also got that reddish color going on, and we also have the anomaly of the angled text that actually in the end stands out more than the rest of everything else because this tends to blend together. Layout's dynamic. Color's neutral, you know, not a lot going on there. You know, the target market's hard to say with this one, but, you know, because it's a balance bar, And it's kind of a health bar. We're assuming that these are, geared toward healthy individuals who are now, checking out the world on the Mayan ruins or whatever. So, does it work for the target market? Maybe, maybe not. That's one of those things you might say, is this working or not? Our final ad is a simple ad where, the Hummer ain't no more. It obviously went extinct. But, we have gradation going on. We have contrast a lot versus a little teeny bit, but it's emphasis of the minority, which we'll talk about in the next project, so that it really creates a sense of strong focal point, even though it's really, really small. We also have a dynamic layout. Typography is small, but does the job, especially at size. No structure. Anything else going on here? I don't know. You could say there's a little bit of an anomaly going on because the structure, the mechanical nature of the beast, and the organic nature of the environment. You could say that there's a little anomaly going on there. It's definitely a sense of space because it's got a lot of depth going on there, and this thing is definitely at the point where it's receding, although it's not quite there yet. So it's a strong sense of space on that. So that's essentially some of the things you're going to be looking for when you start thinking about your ad critique. All right, so I hope that helps.